Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this meeting dedicated to August Wilson. My name is Gloria Marini from the theatric company La Piccionaia, and this is the first of 4 webinars which will take place over every 2 weeks, belonging to a broader project called the Wilson Project, which is designed to let the Italian public know August Wilson, the greatest African American playwright from the 20th century, winner of 2 Pulitzer Prizes, who is too little known in our country. The DiSLL project is supported by the U.S. Consulate General in Milan and realized by the Piccionaia with its partners, August Wilson Legacy LLC, the Humanities Department of the University of Padua, and the European Studies Center of the Pittsburgh University. The project will end with a debut for the first time ever on an Italian stage in Italian of a play by August Wilson, Jitney, that will be staged on May 12th at the Astra Theatre in Vicenza. Alongside, a series of meetings, insights will take place, such as the projection of movies on the African American world, workshops with schools, and this cycle of webinars. I want to thank from this moment the guests that will populate these occasions, those of you who are following us via streaming, and the person who will moderate this meeting, the president of the Rising Africans Association, Ada Ugo Abara, who I will now defer to, and I will see you at the end of the meeting.
Here in Italy. It is close to not known in Italy, but he tells through his plays all the 20th centuries, the life of African Americans during the 20th century in the US, and he tells these stories decade by decade. So histories and relationships, and gives such a rich overview on the US was back in the day. Those of you who know the Italian context knows that the path of African Americans in the US is much different than the one here in Italy. But there are some fil rouge, some touching points. And probably if we get to know what happened elsewhere, we might just learn how to do and to be better hearers as well. I am a member of the Resident Africans Association, so an association for African descent people that were born and have been growing and living here in Italy, especially in Veneto. We founded our association in 2015, and we wanted to tell our reality. We wanted to tell what the situation in Italy was. So I wanted to tell people what's like to be living in my skin, and telling stories that differ from the standard Italian person is, but still we belong to this context. And so they are defined in this context, individually, professionally, socially, and so on. So tonight, as a moderator, and with this wish to put together our insights and points of view, I'm very happy to be introducing our guests for tonight. And they're not 3 random hosts. This webinar starts off with great names. And thanks to them, we will try to see who Wilson was, to see what the rationale was behind his plays, and to see how his plays reflect in today's world, to understand more our context. I'm talking Constanza Romero-Wilson, Rawson, and Renzo Carbonera. the first guest. These three guests are key to let us understand and to really grasp the East plays and our bridge, fill the gap to bring this place to Italy. And we'll open up the debate on a society that's changing and moving on. Constanza Romero-Wilson was the wife on August Wilson and is the director of the Constanza Romero-Wilson LLC, and is the person that's bringing forward his literary legacy. We find many touching points. She is a costume designer. So she works in the movie industry. Her curriculum and career is great, and you can imagine how touched and excited I am to be present to her. And she's here with us tonight because as she's the one that's bringing forward the legacy uh, of August Wilson, she can tell us some, insights and bits that were not probably so known to the broad public. And over these four meetings, we will get in the depth of this experience, culminating in Vicenza. And so we will have the questions. We will have the answers. The answer to the questions of who was August Wilson and how can he impact our Italian context. So thank you for being here.
Hello, thank you. It's nice to be here. My name is Constanza Romero-Wilson. Buonasera a tutti. Sono molto felice di essere qui con voi. I am the executive director of the August Wilson Legacy LLC. And I take care of all of the productions and all of the movies and all of the projects that happen around my late playwright husband, August Wilson. I met August Wilson in 1987. I was a student at Yale Drama School, and by then he had already had let's see, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom on Broadway and Fences on Broadway, and he was about to bring Joe Turner's Come and Gone on Broadway. But when I met him at Yale, he was working with director Lloyd Richards, who he met at the O'Neill Playwrights Conference, and he was debuting. It was the very first production of The Piano Lesson. And my teachers had selected me to do the costumes for the show. And, I met him and he was just such an approachable man. He was very interested in the work that I did. He was very interested in seeing my drawings and wanted to know where I got my ideas. I think it's probably pretty amazing for any playwright to have open up their plays and have other artists enter with their expertise into the play. Up until other people enter the play, it is just words on paper. And suddenly he has to share those words on the paper with all of these other people, with the actors, with the directors, with the designers, with the audience. And suddenly everybody shares that same play. And that is one of the things that originally drew me to the art of theater, is the collaborative nature of this art form. So I got to know August. We formed a quick friendship because I was also very interested in what he did. And what I found out was that his plays were very visually rich. He was a visual playwright, and he would start out with a vision in his mind, uh, and then he would hear the people speak, which always was kind of magical and very um, interesting to me. He also was very influenced by the artist Romare Bearden, who I very much uh, encourage all of you to look up. His name is Romare Bearden, and if you look up his work, he is a collagist. In other words, he would cut out magazine photographs and other photographs, and then he would rearrange them and place them in a landscape that was very much part of the African American um, uh, world and the history, and giving, you know, both August Wilson and Romare Bearden gave African American people a voice, a center, the center of the universe. And that was something that, even though Lorraine Hansberry and a couple other playwrights had done already on Broadway, August came in to the scene in, let's talk about the world of Broadway. He came in 1984 with the play 82, maybe? I'm not quite sure, but in the early 80s, he came in with his play Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. And it revolutionized the world of theater, really, because he placed African American people at the center of that universe. And those people had conversations with their gods. And it wasn't necessarily the same gods that are represented in the plays of white America. And he also put them in situations that were really very human, powerful, very painful. I mean, the African American history in this country is very painful. But it wasn't all about the pain with August Wilson. He had triumph because it was the triumph of the human soul. And with Ma Rainey, for example, the triumph of the human soul is embodied in the blues, in the music that Ma Rainey sings. That play was followed by Fences, which also, I think that August said, a lot of the reviewers and the critics at that time, when they saw Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, they said, well, this is a great play, but can he write the great American play, which, in their sense was centered around one central figure. And the play Fences was August's solution and answer to that call. And the play centered around a man, his name is Troy Maxon, and he is a garbage collector. And he's somebody very overlooked by society, but he gave that man all of the beautiful qualities that anybody can describe on stage, and talk about speaking to the gods. He had a constant conversation with death, much like Greek drama. I can't I can't describe to you what a furor August Wilson's work caused in the American theater, putting African Americans in the center of the stage, and it was through his poetry. August was a poet first before he became a playwright, and people say, well, he overheard people speaking in this fashion, and then he put it on the page as though he was a conduit. But he was, but he infused that African American language with his own poetry. So you will not hear African Americans speak the way that people speak in August Wilson's plays. You will um, you will maybe hear snippets, but August poetry elevates the people, elevates the language. And now I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I want to brag for a second. He is being called the American Shakespeare. And we have Wilsonian actors in the same way that we have Shakespearean actors. So not everybody, not all Black actors, Black American actors can do August Wilson. They have to really study the cadence and the rhythm and the poetry of the language. Um, uh, August Wilson, I wanted to tell you a little bit about living with August Wilson. He was a very passionate man. He fought for uh, uh, justice. He fought for human rights. He saw um, uh, he saw inequality. He saw injustice in places where some of us may not, may have thought it was the status quo. But when I was with him, he would talk constantly, especially after a cup or two of coffee. He would speak endlessly about his characters, about possible books that he wanted to write, about a poem that he wanted to write or that he had written. He memorized all his plays, so therefore he was able to give you snippets of the plays whenever you wanted to hear him. And he would speak about the characters he was writing at the time as though they were next door neighbors. He would say, "Do you know what Youngblood did today?" I'm using the character of Youngblood because he is in Jitney, and I hope that many of you will come and experience the play because I will speak for a moment about how important it is to have his plays translated in other languages. It is my absolute pleasure and honor to have August play Jitney in Vicenza at La Piccionaia, Centro di Produzione Teatrale, uh, in Italian. I personally love Italy and I love the Italian language, but also to have August's August's importance being recognized in other countries other than United States, and for it to be used for um, to demonstrate human rights, to demonstrate the humanity in his characters, to give people an opportunity to, as Ada said, study what racial um, tensions and racial progress we have made in America or not made in America is important for the rest of the world. We here in the United States have dealt with the legacy of slavery for since its inception, and it is a very complicated history. It's a very um, fraught with so much pain and so much tension still to this day. I think that it's a living, for better or for worse, is a living legacy that we have here. And we still struggle. We still struggle every day with the with this legacy that is the legacy of slavery. However, August gives us an incredible window into other ways of thinking and of not being victims, all of us victims of our inheritance as people, and racism passing down through generations. August gives us a window out of that, and for that, in so many other in so many other things, um, August was my husband, my beloved um, husband, and he was also my favorite playwright. Um, what did he write? He wrote a series of 10 plays, which are encapsulated in what we call the American Century Cycle. And each of those plays is a play set in a different decade of the 20th century. I remember when August was finishing writing uh, King Hedley II, and I said, "Oh, August, now you have to write a play in the aughts, in the 1900s." And he said, "What? I thought it was almost finished." And with that, he wrote Gem of the Ocean, which for me is one of the most beautiful plays in the American Century Cycle. And then afterwards, he wrote the play for the 90s, which was his last play, the play that he finished before he died. In 2005, he died of uh, um, liver cancer. The doctors, I mean, he didn't have much to live. He was diagnosed in June 14, and he died in October 2nd. So in that time, he dedicated himself to finishing the last play in that cycle of 10 plays, the American Century Cycle. So even in his dying breath, he dedicated himself completely to his work and his legacy. Now, after 2005, I have been in charge of the legacy and the all of the work. We have had countless productions of his plays in America, in many different cities in the United States. We have had productions in Canada. Right now, we're looking to have production of Fences both in South Africa and in Australia, which is quite incredible. I wish that I could travel the world and see all these plays. We have in Pittsburgh, we have had his legacy take place physically. We have a center for African American culture, and it's called the August Wilson African American Cultural Center. And within that center, we have a exhibit on his artistic journey. It's called August Wilson, the Writer's Landscape. So any of you who travel to Pittsburgh, please do not miss this exhibit on August Wilson. You will really see the richness of his work and all of the sacrifice and the work that it took to arrive at the American Century Cycle. We have the permanent exhibit, and then we also have August's home that was restored, and it is now a working art center. It's called August Wilson House. I was just there just a couple of days ago, and it is doing wonderfully. It has all kinds of programs for the people in the Hill. What do I mean by the Hill District of Pittsburgh is where August grew up, and it was and it still is where Black people live. It was, as you will see in the arc of all of the plays for the American Century Cycle, you'll see that it got destroyed and it has not been built up yet. The Hill District that August grew up in no longer exists. And that is really sad because when August was growing up there was a very beautiful, uh, uh, active community with uh, lots of people living together, and it was sort of very um, it sustained itself, and then it no longer does. We have had the two documentaries. One is the American Masters documentary that was done by PBS, and if you can get your hands on it, you can see also August's life portrayed in this documentary. We have another documentary called Giving Voice, which is about August Wilson New Voices, which is competition for young people to memorize and share their knowledge of August Wilson and perform some of his monologues on stage, including the August Wilson Theater on Broadway, which was named, of course, after the playwright. We've had the film Fences with Denzel Washington. Denzel Washington also once has been a key part of the August Wilson um, uh, uh, sorry, I got distracted by you, Ada. But anyways, I know I'm probably rambling, but, I just wanted to also say that we have, Broadway revivals with Fences, Jitney, and The Piano Lesson. The Piano Lesson just closed, and it starred, Samuel L. Jackson. So we have also lots of actors that are very dedicated to the August Wilson legacy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your words and for guiding us through this um, images. And I wanted to start from this, from your experience, and to draw the attention back on the person, because it you don't really know a writer only based on their plays. You know an author also based on their history and experience. So thank you for your words. Thank you for letting us know what's behind those plays. I am very happy because when you said that Ma Rainey's Black Bottom was the first play you mentioned, and I got to know August Wilson through this play, and even if I'm not African American, even if I don't know African Americans' culture and history in theater or movies, the theater is something that's very unusual sometimes and disruptive. I loved the kind of vernacular it uses. I love how dynamic it is. And, and sometimes I got the perception I got lost a bit. Obviously, adaptations are a thing, but it is not something that you can watch carelessly, because you need to pay a lot of attention. You need to pay a lot of attention on the players and to absorb and soak in everything that's been said, and also the costumes and the scenarios and settings. I would have a million questions for you, but I have another two very important speakers tonight. I hope to to go back on these topics on other meetings. So thank you once again for your time. And I'm sure what you said will stay with us in the future. Thank you. The second speaker for tonight's meeting. So after getting to know August Wilson, his personal life also, we will get to know the voice that academically focused on August Wilson's plays, which is Chris Rawson, writer, university professor, and American critic, believed to be the greatest expert on August Wilson. So, good evening. Thanks to your work, we can see and we can read comments, reviews, satire that stemmed from August Wilson's plays. We said that his narrative and his plays that really show what people were actually living back then, and that changed a bit the standard way of narrating events for African Americans. So, Mr. Professor Rawson, thank you for being with us tonight. And we would like you to share with us your insights and to talk us about your knowledge. Thank you.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. It's always a pleasure, although a little intimidating, to talk at the same time as Constanza. Every time she speaks, and I've heard her speak many times on different occasions, I learn something else about August and her life with August. I really have to excuse myself right off. What is this elderly white man doing here talking about this great African American playwright? And it's pure luck. Luck. I was a teacher of English and American literature at the University of Pittsburgh, but I had just become the theater critic for the local newspaper in 1983. And in 1984, August's first play arrived on Broadway, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. So my editor said, well, you have to go to New York and see it and write a review. He's a Pittsburgh playwright. By that time, he was living in St. Paul, Minnesota, but he had spent half his life, at least in Pittsburgh, more than half his life, it turned out. So I went to New York and was, astonished by this play. And the first act of Ma Rainey's Black Bottom ends with Levy's extraordinary speech about what happened to his parents at the hand of the racist white men who controlled where they lived. And I stumbled out onto the sidewalk at that intermission, and somebody said, well, you're from Pittsburgh, aren't you? Do you know August Wilson? And I said, no, never met him. And they pointed just adjacent, and there was August puffing on a cigarette, which he was usually doing. So I went over and introduced myself as a critic from Pittsburgh, and August went, oh, a critic. So I went, oh, a playwright. And we started talking. And I had the extraordinary good luck of being a theater critic at just that place and time. So for the next 21 years, I was able to follow his career, interview him, review everything, talk to him, and in the process, become something of a friend. August is the most important person in my life other than my family. He's a man from whom I learned a great deal, I particularly enjoy that. I learned a great deal in many different ways. He had not finished the 9th grade in high school. He'd really stopped his regular schooling when he was 15, 16. But he took himself to the library, as he had already done, and he educated himself. And I found that he knew a lot more about a lot of things, not just Black life, but American history, American life, a lot of things that I didn't know. What an extraordinary experience that was for me. I want to follow the things that Constanza said. Oh, so I should say, yes, he's my favorite playwright too, Constanza, and I'm happy to participate in this great argument going on in the nation. I do not actually, according to your title, the title of this event we're in, he's identified as a poet of the theater of Black America, and that's true. But he's not just a poet. He's obviously a playwright, and he's not just the poet or playwright of Black America. He's the playwright of America. He's filling us in on a whole part of our shared history, Black, white, or any color, our shared history that was not generally on the public stage, as Constanza's already said. It's Black America, African American history has been with us in this country since 1619, and even before, it's been with us since 1776, when Blacks played active parts in the American Revolution against England, since 1865, when Abraham Lincoln, when America finally freed its slaves, but then in many dates since then, as that process grinded slowly toward the very inconclusive period where we are now. August was always was frequently told when he brought the first draft of a new play for workshopping. The producers would say to him, "But August, it's so long. Why do these people talk so much?" And August said, "Because they have a lot to say, and they haven't been saying it on the Broadway stages before. There's a lot of history, of personality, of character, of sociology. There's a lot going on." And American audiences certainly agreed with that. The situation of August is astonishing. He had his first play on Broadway in 1984. And over the next 20 years, he had nine plays playing in New York, with one more play on the way. Radio Golf took another couple of years before he made it. There was a huge interest and need in the American theater-going culture to see this work. He made it accessible to the broad culture of, as I say, predominantly white, the Broadway audience, who felt they were understanding, getting a vision of lives that they really didn't recognize, didn't know, people that they had often passed by on the street without that kind of recognition. And of course, what the plays really teach you is, by not knowing African American life, you're not knowing a huge section of the whole American story, because those lives are an intimate part of that story. Of the 77, there are of the 10 plays, those 10 plays, there are 77 total characters on stage. 5 of them are white, and they appear in the first couple of plays that August wrote. And then he decided he didn't need those white characters, because by portraying Black life, you sense the white characters all around, setting the parameters of the culture that the characters on stage live in. By the way, there is an 11th play. So we know about the 10 plays, one set in each decade of the 20th century. There's an 11th play, which I will flip in front of your eyes here, How I Learned What I Learned. It's a one-man monologue that August wrote to present himself. And it's an extraordinary introduction to what the Hill District where he lived was like when he was 20 years old and just starting out on his young adult life. It's a wonderful way to get a sense of the world out of which these plays appeared. It's interesting that August didn't really become a playwright, really dig into it until he left Pittsburgh. When he was 33, he moved to St. Paul, Minnesota, north at some distance from Pittsburgh. And as he said, freed of the pressures of the life in Pittsburgh, where he was scrambling around trying to earn enough money to pay his rent for the next month, or food, or the basic necessities of life. Freed of that, with a job in St. Paul, he was able to hear more clearly all those voices he'd listened to back in Pittsburgh, all the elderly gentlemen, elderly people in general, that he'd had time to listen to at the jitney stations. A jitney, by the way, is an illegal taxi service, essential in a Black neighborhood. So the jitney stations, the diners, the street corners, the numbers joints, the barber shops, he spent a lot of time just listening, soaking up the history of these people who he was part of. and he started to rehear a lot of that material and then refashion it in his own imaginative way. So I do not think it's appropriate to call August Wilson a historian. He's a historian only in the way that William Shakespeare is a historian. And anybody who's studied Shakespeare, has any familiarity with Shakespeare, knows that he takes, even in his English history plays, he takes history and refashions it, makes something new of it, turns it into comedy, tragedy, melodrama, like his other plays. And that's really what August does. All of his plays have historical truths in them, but if you study them too intently, you'll see that, well, he's moved something by a few years, he's moved something else. He's using them as the building blocks for these intense dramatic experiences. Experiences, by the way, although they are generally considered dark, they are also very, very funny. He could blend those two. There's a richness. It has something to do with the audiences you see it with. I will say, a predominantly white audience will sit there, mouths open in attention, whereas a Black audience will understand some of the detail more closely and there'll be robust laughter and recognition. And so what you really want is an audience that's half and half, and then you get this whole complex interplay in the audience, because of course the audience is where a play ends up eventually. I don't know, Ada, I've got some pictures I'd like to show. It's about 6 or 7 minutes. Can I take us through those, or should I put that off? I'm not quite sure how much I've been. Well, I guess you do it. I'm going to tell you a little bit about these pictures, and it's a tiny bit of a biography of August's life, but not just. The house right in the middle of the picture behind that truck, that's from 1937. That's the house that August's family lived in. They lived in 2 rooms in the back. There were 6 children and 2 adults sharing 2 rooms with an outhouse, as we call it, the bathroom facility in the backyard. So go ahead, please. Here's his mother and father. His father was a German immigrant who was a professional baker, had an alcohol problem, came and went from the family, but was around obviously enough to father these 6 children. And there's his mother, Daisy Wilson, who was an immigrant too. I mean, she was an immigrant from North Carolina who moved north. Next one. This is the Lower Hill District, and you see it at a time when it had been torn down. You see at the top, downtown Pittsburgh. And this is in the late 1950s, when August would have been 10 to 15 years old. He was born in 1945. And they tore down the Lower Hill, which was 50% Black, but 50% Jewish immigrants, Italian immigrants. It was a melting pot of the city. That's what August grew up in. And they're building a public facility in the middle there for sports teams and large entertainments. But the lower part of the hill had been torn down. The next thing that happened to the Hill District was, after the assassination of Martin Luther King in 1968, a lot of the parts of the hill off to the right that don't show in this picture were burned down in anger. And the hill, which had 55,000 people when August was young, sunk to under 10,000 people for the next decades. But the hill is the place where the plays are set. Next, please. Here's August as a kid, a young man. Next. This is a characteristic picture of August writing on a pad of paper in a coffee shop. or a bar, but with a cup of coffee beside him. He would spend days doing that, generating material, which he would then form into these extraordinary plays. Next. I like this picture. This is August with a cast of a play. It's actually the premiere of his play, King Hedley II. And that's the cast that was doing it at a theater in Pittsburgh. It went on to Seattle, et cetera, and then eventually Broadway. And you see August right in the middle. He loved his actors. I'm just going to, what do I do? Next. That's it. I like this picture too. There's August in the middle. And there was a group of his fans here in Pittsburgh who had started an August Wilson reading group. They would sit around a table and read one of his plays. And he was in town once. He wasn't living here anymore, but he came through town to see family members. And he called up and said, are you doing a reading of one of my plays today? And they said, yes, as a matter of fact, we're doing Jitney. So he said, well, I'll come read with you. So he showed up and read the part of Turnbow in Jitney. It's wonderful that the Italian theater's first August Wilson play is going to be Jitney, because that is actually the first of the American Century Cycle plays that he wrote. He wrote it and it was produced in 1982, and then he put it in a drawer and he went on with Ma Rainey and Fences and Joe Turner. And it was 15 years later before he went back to Jitney and improved the script because of what he learned in the process along the way. Next. Well, I had to throw this in here. It's a picture of me in August at a Broadway opening, proving that we knew how to wear tuxedos. Next. And here's Constanza with August outside a theater that August had the premiere of King Hedley in. It was just built, and he had the theater had the honor of premiering a new August Wilson play. Next. That's a better close-up of them. Constanza, I have lots of pictures of you in August. I just threw a couple of them in. Next. So here's August on the left, standing on the street outside the house that he lived in for his first 13 years. And he lived in 2 rooms at the very rear of the house on the left, and you can see them up close, what that rear of that house had become by the early part of this century. And much of the Hill District itself had become derelict in that way. Next. Here's August a couple of blocks down the street. He's walking behind a house which he said was the house that his mother was living in when she died, and he used that as the setting for King Hedley II. Next. Here are some images of what we call August Wilson House, and you see it in the upper left-hand corner, standing there, not being occupied at all, and then various stages in the restoration that we've been going through. We finally opened it up this summer. We've got a couple of pictures of that because it is, as Constanza was nice to say, one of the new centers for August Wilson studies, for people to get contact with August Wilson. But I see the group that has restored it, have designed it to be an arts center for the Hill District, to pay back the Hill District for much that it gave August. Next. Just a couple more here, Ada. This is a production of a play in the backyard of the house, a play that was designed to happen in that area called 7 Guitars. Next. And this is what the house looks like now. You saw the derelict, but it faces on the street to the left. extends back, and then there's a theater space in the backyard where this past summer we had a production of Jitney. Next. A map of the Hill District on which we have placed 1 through 10. It's hard to tell. You can tell about a third of the plays, specific places where in August's mind they were set. They're fictions, but they're set in a real space. So about a third of them we can be specific about a third of them we can guess, and about a third of them we're just taking, we don't really know exactly. We can just suppose in a certain area. Next. Let's pass through Felicia here. Pass next. And there's Constanza and friends out front of August Wilson House before being restored. Next. The annual block party we have outside of the house, which is a huge festival for the Hill District. We had 7,000 people show up last year. Next. The stamp. This is a mark of distinction when the U.S. government puts your face on a postage stamp, as you see in the upper right-hand corner, just year before last. Next. Movies. There is actually a TV movie of The Piano Lesson, starring Alfred Woodard and Charles Dutton. Next. And then you may know of the movie of Fences, and here's Denzel Washington, who starred in the movie but also directed it. He's filming it here in Pittsburgh. Next. I end up here with a little series that have to do with jitney. This is actually a jitney station where men receive calls and go out in their cars to do the taxi service. And this is the actual jitney station that August used to sit around in and talk with the drivers. And the telephone number in that real jitney station is the one used in the play. Next. Here's the program of the very first production of Jitney in 1982. So that's the first of the American Century Cycle plays, back when Jitney had an exclamation point as part of the title. Next. Pittsburgh cast, actors playing Jitney drivers. Next. Here's the cast of Jitney when they took the play to London, and they won the Olivier Award for the best new play of the year on the London stage. A wonderful mark of distinction for a play born on the streets of Pittsburgh. Next. That's the set of the latest production, big production of Jitney, the one on Broadway 5 years ago. And that's the Jitney station looking out on the streets of Pittsburgh. Next. I love this set. This is not Jitney. It's a set for Radio Golf. But you see in the middle of the office that is the set for the play. But you see also off to the left an old barber shop, and off to the right an old diner. The set designer has made these things part of the life of the play. Okay, I think there's a couple more. Next. Constanza already talked about the writer's landscape. Next. And we'll end with this. These are materials about the August Wilson Archive, now installed at the University of Pittsburgh Library, 450 boxes of paper that Constanza did us the wonderful thing of sending to Pittsburgh, and it's now being collated and curated. It's an extraordinary resource for August Wilson studies. I want to apologize for talking so long, but I'm finally done. Ada, nice to see you there.
Thank you. Thank you for taking us by hand and guiding us through these pictures. I was looking at the pictures and I didn't even realize that the time was ticking. And having these pictures and photos really allow us to touch the reality of what you have been talking about. And I'm sure it has been a precious source of information also for the people who are now following, participating in this meeting. So thank you for telling us how August Wilson tells American history, not African American history, but American history, because it's a lens through which we can see the entire American history. And it really echoed in me because we do say the same in Italy, because we cannot set apart uh, foreigners or Italians. We all belong to the same place. And here again, the relationship of these memories that date back to slavery and gets to today tells a story, tells a narrative. And in this story, in this narrative, African Americans in the US and African descent people here in Italy are part of that history. I really love that those pictures. I'd love to take a look at the whole archive. And thank you once again for for talking to us of Jitney, for showing us the Jitney station, and for telling us how geographically Pittsburgh is made and how the geographical aspect is present in August plays. And I will now defer to the last speaker of today. So thank you. Thank you for your insights. The third speaker that will talk about um, August Wilson is the director Renzo Carbonera. He is a movie and theater director, as he is adapting Jigny for the stage. So thank you for your work together with the Piccionaia theatrical company. So how was this idea born, and why did you want to bring it on stage? When I first reached out to the Piccionaia, I've been told that it is a theatrical production in Italian in Vicenza with a cast of only African descendants actors. My jaw dropped because that was not really taken for granted. And also for me, as I live in Veneto, this is a revolution. So please tell us more about it. How did you get to Wilson, to African Americans history and the Italian context? Thank you, Ada, for this introduction. As you said, I come from the movie industry, and the movie industry is what made me discover August Wilson. It was 2019. I was in the US with a movie called Raising, that was coming out in that period in the US. So I attended festivals and events. I spent there a couple of months. It was spring 2019, and in one stop, I was in Pittsburgh. When I was in Pittsburgh, I was spending there a couple of days to present the movie, and I've been and people were talking to me about August Wilson as he was an exceptional point of reference for the city, and I didn't know much. I didn't know him, and I had never read any of his plays. I didn't know who he was. So, thanks to some professors of the Pittsburgh University who I met over that period, and also thanks to Chris Rawson and also thanks to Costanza, over these years, I've had the chance to read the Wilson's plays, and I thought that, and it was something that I already had in my mind. So bringing something into the theatrical, into the theater industry, I suggested this idea to the Piccionaia. It was 2019, 2020, around that time. Then the COVID broke out. Theaters were closed. We stopped for a while, and I took that time to think over it. And over this period, we created this project. It is a very complex project as we need to stage one of the Wilson's plays, but we needed the translation from Wilson's jitneys as there was no translation from English into Italian. There were some translations into Chinese, Japanese, if I'm not wrong, even though they were not staged. And also in Spanish, if I'm not wrong, but they were not conceived to be staged. But most of all, we did not have anything in Italian. So it was 2020, and we entered into this partnership with the University of Padua and the University of Pittsburgh to translate, to have this translation. It was obviously a complex process, and it took time because obviously is writing is very oral and reflects the African American vernacular English, which is very hard to recreate into Italian. But we can play with the sound of words and the oral speaking. So that was our first effort. Another key moment was the cast. My need, I wanted to be truthful to the original play, and so recruiting actors for Jitney ri- with African descendant history. And back then, I didn't know any of these amazing actors I got to meet. So I recently, uh, I, I just come from a first residency with them that lasted a couple of weeks, during which we also prepared a few things and we selected the talents. And after the past 2 weeks, it has been amazing for me. We really came in contact and get inside the words of the text of the plays. And I have to say, I believe there is a strong symbiosis between us and Wilson. I would like to go back to Jitney. So why this play? Well, uh, it was the first play I read, but that was really by chance. Even though, as Chris said, Jitney was the first one that he wrote, but then he revisited it and changed it around a bit later on in his life as he gained more and more expertise. So the second reason, I also have another reason. Jitney comes from the 70s, and it's the beginning of the industrial crisis of Pittsburgh, also due to the increase in prices of raw materials and oils, which is pretty close to the one we are living today. And so, from an important industrial city, the the fabric of the city goes into crisis, and it can be perceived in jitney. And then there is also the part of demolishing parts of the city. And then in the 80s and 90s, also in Radiant Wolf, this transformation of Pittsburgh is highlighted even more. But at the same time, the 70s for Italy, it is a period which is crucial following the 60s economic boom, and it's a period when Italy, as a country for immigration, becomes a country also for immigration. And so all the actors we have selected, and many other people I know that are into their second or third generation, they were born in Italy, but their parents or grandparents were immigrated into Italy. So this parallel situation between the Pittsburgh situation and the Italian kind of context made me think that it could be the proper play to start with. The first one in which I can see, or I could see, the shift in the Italian society. So I started working on this. Then when the COVID restriction were lifted up, when I could finally travel back to the United States in 2021, I took a flight and went to Pittsburgh. I met Chris. I met Costanza. Costanza brought me to eat the burger with fish and fried fish, which was one of the favorite dishes of August Wilson. And I was welcomed as if I was in my own home. I I also paid visit to other actors and directors that August worked with and who staged Wilson's plays in Pittsburgh. And especially, I tried the experience to go to travel on a jitney. And uh, so one night I was watching a football match, which I like, by the way. And at the end of the match, um, my friend calls a jitney for me, and this jitney brings me home. So I lived that experience. These are informal taxis, cabs that move around the uphill district of Pittsburgh, and which are the main character of this play, as everyone in in the play are jitney drivers, and servicing those houses that Chris showed you. So jitney is a sort of Uber, we could say, before Uber even existed, but which keeps existing. It exists in certain contexts, and I had the chance to really travel on it. So I got the real 360 degrees experience. Then I got to see August Wilson's legacies, his notes, his photographs. So the year after, so November 2022, I went back to Pittsburgh, and every time I was welcomed by people in Pittsburgh with with so much joy. And so I now recognize what kind of responsibility I have on my shoulders. Obviously, on one hand, it is a heavy responsibility. On the other hand, it is a pleasure and an honor. So as for the production of Jitney, which is set for May 12th. Thank you. Thank you for this present you have just given us, to me and all of us, Italian public. And I'm sure the Italian public will have the pleasure to really taste and touch what you are staging. And I'm sure that the Italian public will get to know and will love August Wilson. Also, in Italy, I've just discovered that there are people who do the same kind of service, and according to their country of origin, the name changes a bit. I've seen the same in Padua, for example, and I believe, they are here and there. So it will be fun to see the Italian jitneys. I would love to meet one, actually. Thank you. Thank you, Renzo. We don't have much time left, so I would like to invite the first two speakers, so Constanza and Chris. Here they are. We only have a few minutes left. Many insights on the table tonight, and I really hope that the staging and the adaptation will convey all these messages. So my question for all of you is, well, it's not really a question. It's a stimulus. So by hearing you describing Wilson and his plays, I have the feeling that it is really a gift. It is August Wilson is a person you very well know, and I'm sure you know the feeling of watching and paying attention to his plays, and I'm sure you know what kind of effects and impacts such plays have on people. Sometimes you saw the plays being written, sometimes you really were there during the whole process. So what's the wish you like to send out to the Italian public that is starting tonight to know August Wilson? So what's your wish, hope, message that you want to send out and that you would need to provoke in people? Okay, so we will start with Renzo, then Chris, and then Costanza. Probably mine is pretty ambitious, but I hope that the public, after seeing Whitney, they would like to see more, to discover more. I hope that Jitney will only be the beginning of something more, to go into depth of Wilson's literally production. And I hope to see Jitney in theaters and other plays. I hope that the public will be made of the youth and Afro-descendant people, because my goal is to stage African descendant actors, but also African descendant public, but not necessarily, also young people. Thank you. Chris?
Well, Jitney, to me, most intensely, is a play about a father and a son, and it's immensely moving. I can hardly talk about it without my eyes welling up, and it's very funny. It's very rich in the life of these men, but at the kernel of it is this intense relationship and it'll be there for everybody to discover.
Costanza, last but not least, you have the closing remark of this meeting. Also, thank you once again, Renzo and Chris. So what's your wish, and what do you think? What do you think August may have said to the Italian public?
I think that more than anything, August wishes for the Italian public are the same for anybody who enters his plays, and that is to laugh along with and cry and have your heart beating, take the journey with these characters, and by taking this journey your heart will also go along, and that is the purpose of any art, form of art, is for us to be removed from ourselves and walk in the shoes of others, and I think that these characters just can't help but be lovable, really. And as Chris said, the father and son story is contentious, but at the heart of it is also a lot of love, um, and which is what I feel for August every day that I get to do these talks is love for my husband and my playwright. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank our guests for tonight, Costanza Romero-Wilson, Chris Rawson, and Renzo Carbonera, for guiding us in this trip that starts tonight. It has, I know it has started for a few months, but for the Italian public, it starts today. I'm sure we will see each other in Vicenza on May 12th. So thank you, Gloria Marini from the Piccionaia, for your commitment. And I know it's a heavy responsibility, and I will now defer to you and to tell us what next meetings will be. It, it is a pleasure. So thank you all, thank you Costanza, thank you Chris, thank you Renzo for providing us with so incredible words, memories, horizons. Thank you, Ada, for moderating this evening. Thank you once again to the U.S. Consulate General of Milan for allowing this project, and thank you to our partners, University of Padua and University of Pittsburgh, with all the amazing people that work um, for and at these institutions. This webinar will be available in Italian and English on the YouTube channel of the Piccionaia and on the Wilson Project website. So you could always rewatch it and share it. I would like now to invite to next meetings, which are present on the website www.lapiccionaia.org slash the Wilson Project. Next online meetings. Over the next project, we will talk about the African American English vernacular. We will talk about the racial theme in the US and Afro descendants' voices and actors in the contemporary Italian context. The next meeting will be March 21st with with American English vernacular English. We mentioned already the translation, the Italian translation, and our guest will be the first translator who translated Jitney from English into Italian, with experts from the Pittsburgh University and Padua University that reviewed and supervised the work. Thank you once again. See you at the next meeting. Thank you.
Ciao.
Grazie.
Grazie a tutti.
Grazie.